Day 214 of the Ukrainian war map, also known as Russia's despicable invasion of Ukraine. Chelsea here, and today is another quick and simple update as I take a down-to-earth approach to some of the most important happenings on the ground in Ukraine today. And as always, I like to start off with some of those Russian losses. So we're talking both personnel, military personnel, and military hardware there as well. So within the last 24-hour reporting period, we can see there is an additional 400 or so losses in terms of Russian military personnel, now sitting at 56,700. We'll move across to the Russian hardware losses as well. So this is quite staggering today. So armored combat vehicles, an additional 25. Then tanks, a massive 13. Artillery, 7. And this is actually quite a whopping number itself, 4. Now, aircraft, 4. Now, it's not, for instance, a much higher number, but each and every one of these types of aircrafts that were actually taken out in the last 24 hours, and I'm sure to show you some shortly in this video, they are worth tens of millions of dollars at least. And just lastly, having a look at some stats. So my homegrown hobby here of Ukrainian captured Russian working equipment. So a few more vehicles of multiple descriptions added to the list as of today, which is always great to see. And as I'm saying at the moment, this is a work in progress, although I'll give you a specific example of something that I get asked quite often about. So what happens when you've got 2 damaged tanks and you're able to create 1 new tank out of them, or using the spare parts from one to restore another? Well, in situations like those, that means that we'll actually have a working order tank addition to this data set here. It actually does get a little bit more complicated than that, and but I'm sure to explain all of that in the future there to you as well. And we'll now move across to the map for the day, and we'll start out in the north where there's a lot of things happening here. So the Kharkiv region, the Kharkiv Oblast. So Russia, in fact, struck a dam, the Pechiny Dam, which if you zoom in, it's all the way up here, sort of about 100 kilometers or about 60-70 miles due southeast of the Kharkiv city, and there it is right here, so this area. Now, interestingly about this Penichi Dam is that it does connect to the Seversky Donets River, which travels all the way around and all the way down to really the main front lines there. And let's have a look into some of the reasons why Russia might want to do this. So it appears that as Russian commanders are becoming increasingly concerned about their operational setbacks, they're attempting to strike the sluice gates of dams in order to effectively flood Ukrainian crossing points. But the attacks are unlikely to have caused any significant disruptions to Ukrainian operations at all due to the distance between the damaged dams and the actual combat zones. Because basically the Ukrainian armed forces are advancing much further below downstream along the river, which is really quite a long one there. Now next up, this is quite a big deal here. So we have some footage of a Russian Su-30 fighter plane shot down in the Petropavlivka area there. So this is East Kupiansk, or I should probably say it's more like east of East Kupiansk, because the Ukrainian forces took East Kupiansk to the east again of the Oskil River about a week ago there, and they're continuing to push and gain more territory in this easterly direction. And this takedown of this Russian Su-30 fighter plane confirms that Ukrainian forces have crossed the Oskil River, as we already know, in Kupiansk, and now most likely hold a very healthy position in the eastward direction as they get closer to the Luhansk Oblast there. Now, the way that this fighter plane was taken down is reportedly from the US supplied Stinger manpad missile systems. And this all effectively means here there is a newly emerging front line right here. A front line that still has a heavily contested airspace. Russia does not have air superiority here at all, really anywhere at the front lines. It's just impossible for them to do so, which is generally something an invading force wants to achieve as early on as possible in their invasions. It just gives them that strategic all-around advantage, and Russia do not have this. Probably a little bit scary for Russia, I have to quickly say. So when Russian forces are devoting a number of their frontline air assets to the areas that they then get shot down at, it does tend to show that the Russians are getting fairly desperate to regain the eastern bank of the Oskil. Oh, also, in this footage that I've shown you here, it appears the prior explosion in the footage may have been a Russian Su-25 that was also taken out in the last day around the same time, obviously there as well. Though I wasn't able to confirm that, there were 4 planes taken in total in the last day. So 1 Su-25, 2 Su-30s, of which you saw one just then, and an even newer Sukhoi 34 or an Su-34 as well. And let's see what else. So in Kharkiv Oblast, Russian forces lost 2 T-90 tanks due to off-road accidents. Yesterday, there was a spotting of 2 T-90A tanks specifically after a failed counterattack by the Russian forces. Now, this type of tank generally is considered to be one of the best types that Russia has at its disposal. It is, of course, a part of the newer variants of the T-90 series. Though unfortunately the T-90s, their design has made them particularly susceptible to NATO weaponry and anti-tank missile systems. But what's most funny or perhaps just interesting to me is in this Kharkiv Oblast region. So based on my experience in the last few months, Russia seemed to have located most of their later model tanks and indeed other types of hardware to the Kharkiv Oblast here, just sort of sitting here. There was no further offensive. It was just sort of a stagnant battlefield, which meant during the recent counteroffensive in this region here, you can see all the blue liberated territory, all of a sudden lots of their new hardware, Russia's new hardware that is, was destroyed by the Ukrainian forces or indeed captured. So really interesting stuff. I just make this comment in contrast to the Kherson side of things, where Russia has attempted a offensive of some description. But we've seen a lot of older tank types, a lot of older missile systems, a lot of older hardware in general on the Russian side there. Then we move down to the Donbass region. So where we pretty much start off here, we have to zoom in to see it. But here's a photo of Yatskivka. So we have the Ukrainian troops of the 25th Airborne Brigade moving through the liberated Yatskivka area or settlement in Donetsk. And also right up next to it, although we can't see it specified on this map as yet, it's not quite updated. It is now pretty much confirmed that Lzov right here is under full Ukrainian control now. Having said that, we've got a new few liberated areas here, as you can see, indicated by the blue and by the grey area. A lot of these areas now pushed across to Ukrainian control. But it should be said here that Russia is shelling into these regions, more specifically the regions to the northeast of the Seversky Donets River. Sometimes it's hard to see, but you can see this line here of this river there, and you can see on the northeast side of it, we have a lot of liberated territories by, of course, the Ukrainian forces. And that's really noteworthy because the Russian forces used to hold these lands for quite some time, for some many months now, up until very recently. And now the Russian forces are effectively forced to backpedal at these locations. Instead of previously holding them recently, now shelling into these very districts or settlements they once held. Which can't feel good for them, to be honest, no matter which way you look at it. Then we'll move down a bit further. So there's a lot of talk of the Lehman area, of course. Early reports do say that the Russian forces in this area are about to cede the land. Do take it with a grain of salt so far, although Russian forces seem to have less and less exit strategies available to them moving out of this area if they are needing to cede the land and be defeated. Otherwise they are eliminated or they surrender. So we'll certainly be hearing more about Lehman soon enough. What might be slightly more interesting is really the location right next door to it, so Yampil, which is an area that certainly looks to be becoming encircled by the Ukrainian armed forces more so than Lehman, at least as far as these maps go. And we can see for part of Yampil, of course, the Ukrainian forces are above the river there, and they'll very likely continue to take more above the river action there to eventually take Yampil, probably sooner than most other settlements around here. Then we'll move further into the Donbass, or specifically the Donetsk Oblast here. So I'll have to really zoom out for this one. Elchavisk, right here, where there were missile strikes reported at a Russian base right in this location in Elchavisk, where specifically Ukrainian forces hit a train station located 10 kilometers north of this Donetsk city, really. And the strike could have likely been carried out by a HIMARS, for instance. In fact, most of the time it would be. It needs to be. There we go. I've got a lot of footage. I'm sure I've shown you guys about HIMARS in action before. They seem to go in pairs, or at least two or more together. But this is well within the range of a HIMARS. HIMARS will probably go up to, let's say, about, it's not quite accurate, but about there. So 90 kilometers, about 55 miles. So yeah, they can really station far out at a safe distance from the front line and take out anything that needs to be taken out there. And speaking of Russian positions that are quite a ways in, perhaps from the front line, is one like Topmac right here, where Russian positions in Topmac have been under heavy Ukrainian artillery fire all day. Now, I say artillery because it's specifically not a HIMARS, but we are talking easily within a lot of artillery range that Ukraine has. So they have about 25 miles or 40 kilometers of range for a lot of their artillery systems. So that artillery could have been stationed anywhere along that sort of radius that you can see me doing there now. So yeah, Tokmak it's always been an important location. It's got a few things: airfield for one, multiple ammo dumps for two, bases for three, maybe a small command center for four. It just keeps getting bombarded for quite some time now by the Ukrainian forces, and Russia keeps staging things there, and it's just not a great idea for them. Then we'll move across down to bit of an important area here, really the front line on the south side, so the Kherson Oblast and indeed the Kherson city right there down the south west there as well. And starting off, probably no surprises here if you follow really any channel, we have the Novakovka bridge, dam, call it what you will. Ukrainian armed forces hit an ammunitions dump at this location here. Of course, in the Russian-occupied region of the Novakovka staging ground here. This is quite a standard occurrence. It really does appear like the Russian forces are commanded to station their ammunition pretty much at Novakovka or up a little bit further at just Kakhovka. These two locations quite commonly to then repair the bridging part or slowly through pontoons or barges, which also don't work out because they're getting struck by what appears to be HIMARS, so they can't get anything across. But this is my understanding of what's physically happening. So yeah, like I say, Russian forces moving equipment here, ammunitions to this staging area to bring it across to the larger area, the larger front line here on the north bank. But before they ever seem to get anything really across, anything of notable size, it's just getting HIMARS, just the bejesus out of it, just the heck out of it, whatever, you know. So I guess I'm finding this hard to explain because it's the same story every second day, maybe every first day. Something gets blown up here, and the Russian forces just keep sending equipment here to get it staged to move it across. And yeah, enough of that for now. And a very similar circumstance happens as we go down the Dnipro River. Of course, it's all Russian occupied, is the Antonivsky Bridge. So this one, or right next to it, maybe the pontoon just underneath it, was actually struck again. I don't have a photo for this one here today, but this is happening every second day at least as well. So this is probably more of a news piece, but what's really happening here, and this is actually being reported by the New York Times and various other locations, in fact, think tanks, ministries of defense, that Putin is not looking, as we know, Putin is not looking to withdraw from the Kherson front line at all. But he's not a great military mind, so he's got his commanders that are recommending things to him. In particular, the commanders are requesting for a withdrawal from this front line of the Kherson Oblast. So you can see a whole bunch of orky pigs here. Let's just call these Russian units. In fact, if we click on it, we can see the units. So let's just say they're a battalion group of up to 1,000 Russian infantrymen. That's being very generous. It's a lot less than that. In fact, even with any battalion group, you've only got a couple of 100 infantrymen. You've got a lot of vehicles to take care of, a lot of supply units, communications units, all sorts of things. But yeah, let's say there's 1,000 here, which is just not the case per oinky pig. So we're talking 5, 10, 12, 15, let's say about 15,000 Russian troops, which again, unlikely. And Putin, him very self, is keeping them stationed here. There's no better way to put it. They are getting a little bit starved by not having the supply lines that I've been rambling on about. I apologize for the last few minutes there in terms of the bridges in the central and a little bit more north there. And yeah, against Putin's commanders' best wishes, Putin is keeping them on the front line. So it's not really good when anyone micromanages anything, particularly when Putin micromanages against his commander's best wishes. But I will concede, or I will say that while Putin has accepted some recommendations by his Russian commanders, Putin's increased involvement on the battlefield has reportedly created a whole bunch of tensions. And we'll quickly move down lastly on the map to Odessa, where another Russian drone attack on Ukraine occurred by the Shahed 136 kamikaze drones this morning from the direction of the Black Sea. So it may have come from the edge of the Russian occupied territory in Kherson, or maybe even from the Crimean Peninsula. I do know these types of drones, these Iranian purchased drones for Russia, do have a good amount of range, but they're not said to have a great accuracy. Now, in fact, one was shot down, and we know that another one was seeming to attempt to target the Ukrainian Operational Command's South building. So the UOCS, which I quote a lot of the time on these videos, saying that they've confirmed this, that, and the other kills for the day. And speaking of which, these Russian drones, the Ukrainian forces recovered a downed Iranian-produced Russian-operated Mahaja 6 UAV. They're meant to be maybe a little bit an equivalent of the Ukrainian Bayraktar TB2 drones, but still a little bit less advanced as well. Oh, and this is an accompanying Iranian manufacturer-related photo shoot as well to show that it was confirmed that it was the same type of drone. Now I'll move across to some of the news where it is heavily Russian mobilization intensive news. So we're talking about last Wednesday when Putin decided to declare a partial mobilization of his mostly reserve forces. Now, the Russian news outlet named Medusa, quite a doozy this one. So reports from its own sources suggested that all men of military age from 18 through to 50 to be banned from leaving Russia when these sham referendums in the occupied regions of Ukraine complete are all done with and done and dusted. Likely to be around the 28th or the 30th of September, so 3 to 5 business days from now. Because, in really related news, for instance, due to Russia's partial military mobilization, the number of people crossing, good example here, the Finnish-Russian border has risen by quite a bit. So we're talking about Russians going into Finland, and this has been confirmed by the Finnish border guards. Now, ever since the partial military mobilization was decreed, signed into law, confirmed, advised by Putin to the general populace of Russia, there's been an uptick of it's said to be sitting on 54%, so a daily increase of Russians just going across in the Finland border there. So 54% increase, so it's quite massive. And again, in further mobilization-related news, it is now said that 50,000 Russians have taken a one-way ticket to Serbia since war broke out in February, which is one of the few countries that allows visa-free travel for Russians. Now, this next bit of news comes from the ISW, where it talks about where Russian President Vladimir Putin likely continues to address systematic issues, really in the core of things, systematic issues in a Russian senior military command by replacing individuals or senior individuals on the military level, such as the replacement of Army General Dmitry Bulgakov, who has been replaced with Colonel General Mikhail Mizintsev. We are actually starting to get a long and notable string of changes at the military level because Putin is displeased, obviously, with how the war is going in Ukraine, and he's switching out army generals, basically. However, having said all of that, the replacement of individual senior leaders is very unlikely to fix fundamental structural problems in the Russian military. And that's where my spiel a little bit earlier in this video about Putin not taking the advice of his army generals, his commanders, things of that nature, and just micromanaging the bejeebers out of this war. And then moving on to some more news. So over 764 people were detained during anti-mobilization protests in Russia itself just yesterday. Now, according to the Russian independent monitoring group OVD Info, police detained more than 764 people in 33 cities across Russia, including at least 390 of them in Moscow alone. Moscow being, of course, the biggest city in Russia, so you've got half of them alone in Russia. It's actually good to see that, there is quite a vocal sentiment going there in Moscow, just against the mobilization. And because of everything I've discussed here in the news, on September 24th, just yesterday, Russian President Vladimir Putin signed into law amendments to the Russian criminal code, right? So toughening punishments for military deserters or voluntary surrenderers to, say, Ukraine. And this was all reported by the Russian news agency Interfax. So I like to comment on the news, particularly when it comes from a, let's call it a pro-Kremlin or a state media conglomerate on the Russian side. And speaking of all that, in follow-up to that, we've got TASS, T-A-S-S, TASS Media, also another Russian media outlet, has specifically introduced sentencing for some of the things I've mentioned above, such as up to 10 years imprisonment for voluntary surrender, up to 10 years for refusing to fight, up to another 10 years for desertion, 15 years for pillaging, fair enough, and up to 10 years for failing to meet state defense order contracts. So I should probably point out at this point mutiny. So mutiny within any military around the world, it's not favorably looked on, to be honest. Yeah, there is some laws against these things. Now, it's happened plenty over millennia. There's surprisingly not massive millions of people mutiny in the military that's ever really occurred, at least from my findings and research looking into it. Now, I think we're about to give that little factoid a run for its money with Russian military personnel, because we're not just talking Ukraine, we're talking Germany and the rest of the European Union. Talking about giving Russian military a pretty sweet deal for surrendering and doing it in a very safe way, protecting their identity, protecting the reason for their surrender, if it was forced or chosen. So on the one hand, you're going to have Russian soldiers that are not going to want to be cannon fodder on the front line, Putin's cannon fodder. And on the other hand, they're going to be probably given cash bonuses, given a meal, a place to stay, safety above all else, and protection and privacy as to the reason why they surrendered. So it's highly probable that we'll definitely get a few Russian soldier surrenderers, at least a few. Certainly, maybe a lot more. I just love the Russian military to make some sort of a record with voluntary surrender, for instance, or desertion. And just lastly, well, the video is probably getting a bit long, so I'll just throw up a quick meme, given that we are sitting on almost exactly 7 months now into this senseless Russian war in Ukraine. So this little list shows the not so good, the ugly, and the completely horrendous in terms of what Putin's been doing and his confidence about still remaining a master strategist, which I think that he thinks that he is, if that makes sense. And that's why he's getting involved in all of that micromanaging that was just spoken about before. So that's pretty much it, guys. Thanks for watching. Please leave a comment, subscribe, hit that like button, and I do hope to see all of you guys there in the next one. Cheers.